All right, I had to come on live for this one because I hate to break it to you, but baking your pumpkin cake recipe into a loaf pan does not automatically make it a pumpkin bread. We need to talk about this. Yes, I've been triggered, and I'm not sure exactly why I've been so triggered by this one. I think somehow I'm worried that the actual true art and authentic recipes of the bakery are getting lost nowadays with everyone on social media just throwing things all over the place, calling it this or that. So for me, I want you to all learn what an authentic pumpkin bread is. No different than a banana bread, no different than a zucchini bread. I mean, you have to know that these recipes are different than cake recipes. But before we dive into both recipes with a side-by-side comparison so that you can see exactly what is the difference between an authentic pumpkin bread recipe and a pumpkin cake recipe, I want you to know that you can bake your pumpkin cake recipe into whatever you want. Just please let's not call it a pumpkin bread. Let's dive in. We're going to make both. We're going to see the difference. Okay, so just real quick before we get started, what makes these quick bread recipes, as they are properly called, different from a cake? I mean, if you look at the recipes side by side, they have the same exact ingredients. So let's get right into it with first mixing the authentic pumpkin bread recipe. And all you need is a can of pumpkin and a loaf pan. All right, you need other ingredients too, but I know you already have all of them in your pantry. I'm adding a spot of vinegar to my plant milk for an added turbo boost. This acid is going to activate that baking soda, causing your bread to rise properly. Vanilla extract is a nice addition. Some vegetable oil and some canned pumpkin, and then the turbo boosted plant milk. Give it all a whisk, and then goes in the all-purpose flour, baking soda, salt, and spices. Now, take note of this pumpkin bread batter. It is definitely much thicker than what you're going to see when I get into making the pumpkin cake recipe in a minute. So this batter gets scooped into the pan rather than a typically poured in cake batter. Into the 350-degree preheated oven it goes. And now we can make the pumpkin cake bread recipe. Once again, it's the exact same ingredients, only in slightly different ratios. A cake batter is typically going to have more liquid, sometimes more sugar, and oftentimes more oil. And this time for the cake batter recipe, I'm using cake flour instead of all-purpose flour. And this type of softer wheat flour cannot absorb as much liquid as all-purpose flour can. So that in combination with the higher liquid content in the recipe and the higher sugar in the recipe, well, just look at this batter. It is completely pourable versus the pumpkin bread batter that I was scooping in a minute ago. All right, this one into the same preheated 350-degree oven, and then let's compare both breads. Yeah, just look at this is the pumpkin bread recipe, and this is what you're going to want to see in an authentic pumpkin bread recipe. High dome, slightly cobbled on top. And I did do the toothpick test to make sure that it's done because sometimes breads that are big like this can be misleading. It's definitely going to bake for at least 45 minutes, and I'll often turn down the oven to 300 at the last half of baking to make sure that the top and edges don't get too dried out. So check this out. When I slice into this bread, it's firm and dense and very durable. You can tell just how durable it is when I slather on the butter. This bread slice won't break up or fall apart, but at the same time, it's really moist and so delicious. All right, now for the infamous pumpkin cake bread recipe. So it did dome up slightly, which is a nice thing. You can see right away, though, the shiny texture on top versus that cobbled rustic look of the pumpkin bread. That's the sugar and liquid content telling me right away that this is a cake recipe and not a bread recipe. I could just tell just by looking at it. Slicing into it, I can feel that this is more of a fragile, textured crumb, and it doesn't really hold up that well to spreading on the cream cheese or the butter. And let's face it, that's the way we like to eat pumpkin breads and banana breads and zucchini breads, right? So the texture of this pumpkin cake bread is softer and fluffier, definitely spongier. and it's equally delicious. So again, it is totally your preference to bake your recipes into whatever pans you want to bake them in. But if you're baking a pumpkin cake recipe into a loaf pan, please just call it a pumpkin cake loaf so I can sleep at night, and leave the authentic pumpkin bread recipe to have its rightful place in the history of old world baking. At any rate, grab the recipes at GretchensVeganBakery.com. And until next time, happy vegan baking. Bye for now.